let's bring in Dan Clifton right now from Strategas Research Partners. There he is. And we're going to bring him in here. Matthew, come on over here. And this really dovetails on Jim Rogers' angst. This is a famous Clifton chart. This is from the IMF. Countries with bad deficits, the U.S. and the U.K., way out here in the grimness, net debt is a percent of GDP, and then everybody else sort of over here. Do people in Washington understand that chart?
Well, I think they're starting to get it, Tom. And I think the credit rating agencies have been helping this process. They're putting out a warning a week. Each of them seem to be taking turns. And there's starting to be a sense of urgency starting to build. Do they fully grasp the idea of putting $1 trillion of debt out onto the market every year? I don't think so. But I think we're starting to get it. And that makes me at least hopeful that we can get some sort of resolution, or at least a partial resolution right now.
Let's look at Paul Krugman's op-ed today. He's been writing up a storm here. I think some smart stuff on rentiers, which is sort of, it's like almost an 1805 kind of Ricardo sense. Creditor-friendly policies are crippling the economy. I think he means big bank-friendly policies. This is a negative-sum game in which the attempt to protect the rentiers from any losses is inflicting much larger losses on everyone else. This is a huge theme. Is this theme in Washington? Has anybody discovered this theme?
Well, I would say it's actually moving in quite the opposite direction, in a sense that there's a concern building that maybe there's new regulations coming in that will actually hurt future lending possible. But to Mr. Krugman's point is there's been too much focus on the banks and not enough on job creation itself. Look, we're seeing a lot of people now going around the traditional banking system and starting to give loans. We think demand is starting to come back to give out those loans, and eventually that will start feeding into the broader economy itself. If you have people like Oakmark doing these types of loans and traditional hedge funds doing banking loans.
You link politics and economics as much as anyone I know. Has the Gingrich campaign called you today?
No, they have not called me today. But
there's a few openings out here.
I don't know if there's anybody there to make the telephone call. But what we're seeing within the Republican Party is widespread confusion, largely because the Republican Party is now divided between your Tea Party wing and your traditional Republican wing. And that's going to create a lot more situations like Newt Gingrich as we go through the primary season itself.
And here's what they're looking at. Classic chart here. Nothing new. We've seen this a zillion times. We've lived it. Clifton sees debt off a cliff, and there we are, and there's that little bit of a rollover. Just basic debt to GDP. What's the plan right now? Where's Bowles Simpson?
Yeah, well, let me say this. I'm growing very constructive that we are going to have a partial solution. Tom, I would think about this in a two-step process. Step one is going to be directly to get the debt limit increased with maybe about $1.5 trillion of austerity that's tied to it. Then we're going to have a national election, Tom, and that national election is going to decide the way we move to get the other $2 trillion of reforms that we need on Medicare, Social Security, and tax reform itself. Let me just make one other point. We're moving into a period of stimsterity, which is stimulus and austerity.
Whoa, stop. What'd you call that?
Stimsterity. Stimulus plus austerity.
Jargon alert and combo break exclusive. Did you invent this phrase?
I did. Actually,
so I got to send you a royalty check? Stimsterity.
That's right.
I just spoke for 50 minutes to Alistair Darling, and he would have fallen off his chair over this. How is stimsterity doing in the United Kingdom?
Well, I'll tell you this. The U.S. is a little bit different. The president is worried about his reelection, obviously, and he's worried about the economy. And he's worried about debt levels. And so what that suggests is some path forward as a condition of the debt ceiling will be that we'll do $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion of deficit reduction over the next 10 years, with maybe near-term stimulus for 2012 as an insurance policy that the unemployment rate starts going down and we don't fall into a second.
Will the Republicans buy that?
Well, Republicans are going to support their provisions, but I generally think if we're going to do anything on the revenue side, we have 230 House Republicans have signed a pledge not to raise taxes. This will provide a net tax cut in the front year to do the offsetting tax increases. They wouldn't be in violation of their pledge. So the politics and economics are working together. And that's why we're constructive. We'll get some long-term deal.
Okay, we did this chart in blue just to match your good look today. Dan Clifton, this is a new long-term view. We used it with Jim Rogers. Slope matters, and it's steeper semi-log U.S. debt going back to the 20s. And you can see the buildup after World War II, and then responsibility, and then a slope, and it gets a little bit better for a cup of coffee in the beginning of the decade. Call that the tech support and tax revenues. And there's that. So how do we move that slope to a better, flatter outcome?
Well, I think that the path that we're on is probably going to be the right path. I think investors are going to pan this idea, but we got to get discretionary spending and non-Social Security, Medicare entitlement spending flat to negative. Spending has to grow slower than nominal GDP. Tax revenues are growing 9-10% every single month. And so if we can get spending down, we can start bringing in the deficit. We got to get a deficit to 3% of GDP before that slope starts going down. We have a long way to get there, but it's got to happen in two parts.
I have no idea how you get Washington to do what you just said, whatever their political persuasion. Taxes, this is a surprising chart. Bring it up. Income taxes as a percent of GDP, and I think this would surprise a lot of people that it's actually come down a little bit, and yet we're also upset about our aggregate tax burden. What's going to change here? Are we going to have higher income taxes? Are they going to raise the, add a VAT tax? What's the tax outlook?
Well, I would say that the election of 2012 does decide how taxes are going to be put forward. But let me say this, that if we're going to finance entitlements at 24-25% of GDP in spending, and revenues are only at 14 or 15 now.
Anybody can do the math.
Right? Do the math. We'll probably have to move to a value-added tax system because the existing income tax system cannot finance the retiring of the baby boomers under the existing current law. If the Republicans win the election, I think you'll see more of a move to the Paul Ryan type budget, which is seeking to move some of the defined benefits to defined contribution plans and try and get some of that spending down. So it's anybody's guess how we're going to decide it. But Tom, let me just make this point. This will be the first national election since 1948 where we're having an election about the size and scope of the government, and the winner gets to claim victory after that.
And you have a note on incumbency and unemployment.
That's right.
Does not bode well for the president, does it?
Well, we're still 18 months out. Any president that had a rising unemployment rate in the year of their re-election, they lost. That was two presidents, Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush. All the other post-war presidents had a declining unemployment rate, and they won. And that's why we're entering this period of stimsterity. The president needs an insurance policy to get stimulus going to make sure unemployment's going down.
Laura Chapman over there off the set just fell off her chair. Stimsterity. What is... Let's review this again. Yes. It's a break exclusive. Stimulus and austerity.
That's right. So we're going to have 2012 stimulus, maybe a payroll tax cut, full business expensing, and then as part of that package, we will start to get spending going down 2013 and on and starting to get a clamp on the debt system. That's where I think Washington is right now. That's the way I think the debt ceiling will end up.
Too much information. Let's look at stimsterity in your home. I haven't looked at this in a while. It surprised me. Savings to GDP, personal savings as a percent of GDP. It sort of rolled over. Good for consumption. Consumption rescues Washington every time. Are they going to do it this time, or is it going to be like the UK where finally the consumer caves in?
Well, I think the consumers are doing the right thing. They're deleveraging. Government's not deleveraging. But now consumers are going to have the resources that when they want to go out and make purchases, they could. And so I'm generally a lot more bullish on economic growth.
How can you say that with a 9% unemployment rate?
Well, look, the question is where's unemployment going, or where's job creation going? If I look at withheld income tax payments and the daily Treasury tax statements, real time, people are paying their taxes. And that means that maybe the job number isn't as bad as it was in the last month or so. There are still a lot of headwinds out there. State and local governments are going to continue to fire employees, and so we're going to still have that headwind. But at the same time, the data is telling us in real time that incomes and jobs are growing.
So you're suggesting the last jobs report, if you were sitting with Mr. Gingrich's new campaign staff, you would suggest that grim month was transitory?
Well, I wouldn't say that. We've always had breaks in the data. The continuing data continues to show that people are paying their taxes on income, which means they have income, and that jobs are probably growing. I wouldn't want to say that to an unemployed worker if I was Mr. Gingrich or any other politician. It's still a very tough environment, but we are headed in the right direction.
Yeah, we got to go. Don't move because you